Should really have like some cool music or something to like
I know.
get everyone stoked.
That's a good feature to add. That would be really good to do and not very difficult.
Yeah.
Welcome, you guys. We will wait another second or two before we get started. Thanks for joining us today. Go for it, David. I've got spoons. Maybe to honor the time of the folks who showed up, let's get started and we'll just welcome people if they come in a little bit late. So thanks for joining us today. We're here to talk about recreational flows, how they happen and what keeps them going. And we thought about doing this because there are so many rivers whose flow is regulated and predictable that we thought that it might not be obvious to people who have not been around for a while that happens or how that happens. So I think you'll find this really interesting, and we couldn't have two more expert and experienced people with us. Well, David Brown is here, and we'll have him introduce himself or talk a little bit more about his work, and Kevin Colburn from American Whitewater. I'm Risa Shimoda with the River Management Society. I'm here with Angie Furman, my colleague, who's the River Training Center coordinator.
Yeah, thanks for joining everyone. As Risa mentioned, I'm Angie Furman, and I'm the River Training Center coordinator. And this is part of our River Management Roundtable. And these are monthly virtual conversations, bringing together professionals, leaders, planners, managers from across the country to share experiences and expertise around managing rivers and water trails. So this is meant to be somewhat of an open forum for discussing some common issues and topics. And so we encourage you to ask some questions and share solutions so that we can all learn from each other. So excited to have you all here, and I look forward to an engaging and some productive conversation. So as we get into that, just a couple reminders for some group norms around respecting each other and contributing and allowing everyone the space to speak up. And if you've been to these before, this is not a new slide to you. So without further ado, I'm going to have David Brown and Kevin Colburn go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we can get into stuff. David, why don't you go first?
I'm David Brown. I'm currently working with the Tennessee Paddlesports Association, but I have a long history of working on river issues all the way back to 1980 when I was one of the founding members of the Gauley River Council. Then I later worked as the executive director of American Outdoors Association, which was a national association of outfitters and guides, for about 26 years until I retired out of that around 2017.
Thanks, David. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sure. Yeah, Kevin Colburn. I'm the National Stewardship Director of American Whitewater. I've been working on hydropower issues since 2001 when I was hired for AW, and my background's in restoration ecology. I mostly work in the Northern Rockies, Southeast, and Mid-Atlantic.
Awesome. Well, I think David is gonna start some things off for us.
Thank you, Angie. I'm going to talk a little bit about the water releases from federal dams to enhance downstream recreation. Kevin's going to cover the FERC license projects, which Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license projects, which are generally, some of them are on federal dams, but they're private, generally private utility or private, sometimes municipality projects. So next slide, Angie. So when we're talking about reliable releases, we're talking about predictable flows on specific days and at specific times at a flow rate that's optimal for the recreation opportunities that are prevalent at that time. So federal dams are often operated without consideration for downstream recreation values. They're generally authorized by Congress. The core projects are authorized by the Water Resources Development Act, which is passed by Congress about every 2 years. The Tennessee Valley Authority has its own authority, and the Bureau of Reclamation has its separate authority as well. I'm going to focus primarily on the core projects because I'm most familiar with those. The Water Resources Development Act authorizes the projects, and then they're of course funded by an appropriations process later once the projects are authorized. Generally, those projects are authorized for specific purposes, as many of you know: flood control, water supply, navigation, recreation, hydropower, water quality, and irrigation are some examples. Downstream recreation is usually not considered a project purpose unless it's specifically mentioned in the authorization. Doesn't mean there isn't recreation or recreation facilities in the tailwaters, because often there is, but quite a few of the projects don't even have minimum flows, which we've discovered most recently. So in order to get down flows from these dams for downstream recreation, in many cases, we've had to have a specific authorization for that purpose, a retroactive project purpose designation. Next slide, Angie. A good example was in the Gauley River, Summersville Dam on the Gauley River, which was authorized, downstream recreation was authorized retroactively in the Water Resources Development Act of 1988, along with 11 other core projects that had downstream recreation specifically authorized in that 1988 Act. But as I mentioned, some of the projects don't have minimum flows, and so there's still a lot of work to be done at some of these projects. An example, Center Hill Dam in Tennessee that has put and take trout fishery below it. It just recently is establishing minimum flows to enhance the fishery. So there are two primary ways that you can achieve some recreation consideration in core projects, and one is have it authorized by Congress, but then the Corps also has a flow management plan that comes up periodically, and that's the process at Center Hill Dam that achieved the minimum flows for 400 CFS. Prior to that, I think there was some flow coming through that the Corps had allowed to pass through the spillway, but generally the river was either on or off. Hydropower is a project purpose there, and so they were either generating or the river was off entirely. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of releases for downstream recreation? Well, improving the reliability of desired flow conditions for fishing or boating is one. And obviously, you add significant social and economic benefits to existing projects without significant infrastructure costs. flows can also be managed to help reduce user conflicts. For example, you can have lower flows at certain times of the day or on certain days for fishermen, and higher flows consistent with paddle sports, for example, at other times. Generally, these recreation flows have to be consistent or considerate of existing project purposes. For example, flood control, irrigation, or whatever the other project purposes may be. And that can usually be achieved. The one exception would be for some hydropower projects that are diversion projects. When waters return to the riverbed, they'll bypass the turbines. And that's what occurred on the Gauley River, which is kind of a unique situation. Next slide. The Ocoee was the first federal project with a formal agreement to provide significant water releases for downstream boating. And you can go to the next slide too. That was done in 1983, a $7.4 million appropriation was authorized to TVA for 116 days of water releases per year. And the money was $6.4 million was to pay for lost power. The other $1 million went to management uses. Outfitters actually repaid the Treasury over 35 years. TVA required strict reimbursement for the value of lost power during recreation releases. So it's really not the best example of a way to achieve releases, but in the situation with TVA, that's what we were able to get in 1983. Next slide. The Summersville Dam on the Gauley River was the first core project authorized to be operated for the purpose of enhancing downstream recreation, initially in 1984 in an appropriations bill, and then in 1988 in the Water Resources Development Act, along with 10 other projects, core projects throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. And some of those projects have actually, there've been some remarkable success stories, even though the Corps initially was resistant. And the reason we had to get legislation was because, they were, Corps had said they couldn't provide water releases because it wasn't a project purpose. And on the Gauley River, for example, every fall they would draw down the lake from summer pool to winter pool. And when in periods of less precipitation or periods of drought, they would just turn the valve on, let the water run night and day. And so you would have a shorter season than you would have otherwise. So we got actually authorized in legislation for the Corps to turn the water off at night and just run it during the day to extend the season and enhance the economic benefits with very minimal increased costs. But it took legislation to get that to happen. The Corps, I have to say, the Corps has since turned into a remarkable partner on that river and in other places. Another good example is on the Francis Walter project on the Lehigh Dam, which was, next slide, please, which was one of the 11 projects, core projects. It was retroactive, where downstream recreation was made a project purpose retroactively in the Water Resources Development Act. Next slide. And this is, for example, on the Lehigh, the flow management plan is based on the authorization for downstream recreation. And so each year they announce their whitewater releases, and then they also have fishing flows for fishing enhancement. And this occurred subsequent to the 1988 authorization. There were some other things that had to happen to provide the water supply, but it's an example of how recreation releases can be incorporated with existing project purposes without increasing infrastructure costs. and providing significant economic benefits from existing projects. Next slide. With some basic requirements, obviously, if achieving consensus among user groups and having advocacy among user groups is a key factor. If you're having to get a recreation authorization, retroactive downstream recreation authorization, a champion in Congress is obviously required. There are two primary legislative vehicles for the core Water Resource Development Act. You could possibly do it in an appropriations bill too, but that's not generally favored way for authorizations. State agency support is also critical generally, and again, that is especially important if you're simply going the route of modifying the flow management plan, which is a form of direct negotiation with the Corps. You may also need hydrological analysis. There's a great story about how we achieved it on the Gauley River that involves a scientist that did the hydrology for us, but it was very convincing analysis that he did. Next slide. So Kevin, you're up. I guess Angie's going to introduce you.
I think I've been introduced, right? Yeah. Hey, everybody. Kevin Colburn with AW, in case you joined late. So I'm going to talk about private dams, which are really corporate dams typically. So Duke Energy, Pacificor, Brookfield, name your power company. It's probably who you write a check to every month. They're pretty different than government dams in terms of regulation. They're managed by a third-party regulator, whereas government dams are, oftentimes the agency is their own regulator. They are both, basically. So private dams have FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as their regulator. And FERC issues every dam in the country a 30 to 50-year license. So it's an incredibly long, multi-generational time frame. It takes 5 years to get a license. So every 30 to 50 years, there's this 5-year window where if you engage in the relicensing process, which has NEPA at its core, so if you're used to federal land management, you have got like scoping and studies and draft environmental assessment or statement, and then a final, and then ultimately you get a FERC license. So that's how it works. And where recreation comes into play in a FERC license on a project like this one pictured here, which is the West Fork of the Tuckasegee in North Carolina, is that in 1986, the Federal Power Act was amended to require FERC to give equal consideration to non-power uses. So not equal water, not equal money, not equal time, but equal consideration. So we got our foot in the door in 1986 to start making an argument for recreational mitigation. And the underpinnings of that are that rivers belong to everybody. So you have a company that wants to make money and make power, which is a public good, but also private profit off a public resource. So the company is not given the whole river. They're given rights to use it for 30 to 50 years, but they have to share that river with the public in certain ways through mitigation measures like recreational releases. So that's kind of the underpinnings for how we do what we do. Next slide. I'll give an example. The Great Falls of the Catawba. This is how the Catawba River in South Carolina looked for the last 117 years until 2 months ago. It was a dry river diversion hydropower project owned by Duke Energy. Next slide. And this is how it looks today. Based on 20 years of work, a relicensing process that happened in the early 2000s that resulted in a settlement that I was part of. Now there's releases every day of the year, 24/7. There's water in this river. It's a river again. It'll be a river for the rest of all of our lives, probably forever. And then there's recreation releases on top of the base flows that essentially mimic summer thunderstorms and spring thunderstorms. So really amazing outcome. Next slide. And along with releases, FERC projects usually have access provisions. So this is the grand opening of the new put-in for the Great Falls. Next slide. This was all like 2 months ago. And you can have trails. FERC licenses usually have fish passage considered, boat ramps, all kinds of stuff. So lots of recreational infrastructure, but at the heart for us, for downstream recreation, are flows. Next slide. And of course, the outcomes are pretty dramatic ecologically, but also economically. When you see how communities shift when water comes back into a river, you kind of see the effects of dewatering that have been obscured for a century many times, and businesses start filling up and people start visiting again. It's really awesome. Next slide. All right, so roles. So next slide. Everybody has a different role in a FERC process. And I kind of broke it up into 3. You're either a state agency, a federal agency, or somebody else, like some member of the public. And if you're a state agency, you get to do something very important, which is write a Clean Water Act water quality certificate. And the feds, FERC, has to adopt your recommendations into the FERC license. So the state gets to write part of the federal license and prescribe flows. And the reason that's important for recreation releases is that the Clean Water Act, of course, has recreation as one of its goals. So they can prescribe recreation flows as well as aquatic species and kind of a broad range of flows in a river. If you're a federal agency, different agencies have different either mandatory conditioning authority, which is again being able to write prescriptions into the license, or you can make recommendations. This can range from flows to access to fish passage, pretty varied. And then the public, you're basically involved, right? You can file comments, you can participate in the 401 water quality cert process. You can join settlement negotiations if there are some, or you can fully kind of dive into the FERC process and kind of file comments at every stage. And then after the license come out, you can be a consulting party and keep going to meetings and kind of shift how things are managed over time post-license. Next slide. Yeah, so good question, right? What if you missed relicensing because maybe you weren't born yet? Like it's 50 years, right? Like a lot of people, maybe they get to do one of these in their whole career. Probably they've never done one before and will never do one again if you're in a place-based organization. So it's a lot to learn, but there are opportunities to get in the game in the middle. So next slide. And part of the reason there's opportunities is that climate change is happening. And climate change is disrupting the hydropower world a lot. So hydrology is changing, which makes different things profitable and unprofitable and safe and unsafe. And power companies are kind of struggling with these old licenses built around one set of hydrology that no longer exists. So that's causing change. Dams are aging, which means they either need fixed or they need to come out. That's a pretty big pressure. A lot of these dams are 100 years old. Species can come and go. Think about range shifts based on climate changes, basically. Also think about if a dam downstream comes out, suddenly you've got anadromous fish maybe bumping into your dam. That's a change. Probably the biggest one though is that energy demand and revenue is changing a lot. So basically wind and solar are kind of eating hydropower's lunch. If you own a dam that has a lot of storage and flexibility, you're probably still making money, right? And making valuable power that pairs with wind and solar. If you have a dam with very little storage, very little flexibility, probably losing power or losing money right now. That creates opportunities and needs for change. And then lastly, every now and then the government infuses money into the energy system like they've kind of done recently. So those are opportunities, they're forcing changes. Next slide. Oh yeah, that picture, by the way, was, you can leave it here, but was on the Tuckasegee, which is another one of our settlements. And it has one of those fishing boating agreements, just like David talked about, where there's certain days that are optimized for fishing and certain days that are optimized for boating. And we figured that out in rocking chairs on the front porch. Like we sat down and we were talking about the power company's existing flow regime and how it could be shifted around to meet more needs. And we just worked it out. Okay, so how do you get in the game on a river like this, which is the Chioa here in North Carolina? It was one of my projects that reached settlement that we did not join, even though we were there until the very end. Things got weird. They actually tried to charge for water like the COE, and we bailed, argued it in FERC before FERC, and won. So we got the license, but there's no requirement to pay for water. So that was a bad idea. We didn't want to see it spread, so it didn't, which is nice. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's some good ideas on how to get involved. If you weren't born when the last license happened and suddenly you're looking at your career and it's still going to be 20 years until the dam is relicensed, which is your best change to make a big change, or your best chance to make a big change. So first thing, learn about the license. I have people call me all the time and say, I have this great idea for this river. And sometimes I have to break it to them that the license is very prescriptive, change is unlikely, that's going to harm everybody else, good luck. But sometimes licenses have more variability. There is room and there are opportunities to make changes. So learn the facts, talk to people, but then good old fashioned mutual gains collaboration is the best way in the middle of a license to make a change. If a power company doesn't want to make a change, it's going to be a heavy lift. If the agencies don't like that change, it's going to be a heavy lift. If the hydrology impacts somebody else, heavy lift. But if you can get together and start figuring out a better way to do things, these licenses aren't like sent down from heaven or something. They're not perfect, right? Like there's probably better ways to do it than we figured out or someone else figured out 20 years ago, especially in a changing world. So collaborations first, get on the FERC service list, which is basically like their mailing list for a project, and then just start tracking opportunities to get involved. Pretty much every recreation release out there, like every river that has rec releases has an annual meeting where releases are scheduled. And we talk about like last year and next year and like what should do different. You can join those. If they say no, just cozy up to someone who does get to go. Because sometimes they're limited to people that have consulting party status. Sometimes anyone can go, but chances are you can go. And then after that, it gets more legal. At that point, you're really like looking at FERC filings and saying, where is there an in? Like they're going to do a new rec plan modification. Like, can I kind of get in there and file comments and try to affect change? Are they not complying with their license? Can I file a complaint with FERC? And that kind of opens a dialogue too. And then kind of the big thing, the big opportunity is a license amendment, which is, basically the license isn't doing something that people think it should. And can you amend it to actually change the license? Very difficult. You pretty much have to have the licensee on board, which is the dam owner. And it really should come from the federal and state agencies. And lastly, removal. The best dam release, the best recreation release is a permanent one. You just take the dam out. And that's going to happen more and more over time. It should always be discussed. It shouldn't be like an inflammatory thing to talk about. There's no process for dam removal. It doesn't come up during relicensing necessarily. It can always come up. So if you're interested in it and you have resources and you have ideas and you think it makes sense, never a bad time. So next, I think that's it. Oh yeah, one more thing, resources. FERC.gov's actually a pretty good website. They have an e-library where all the records for all the filings for every FERC project is in there pretty much. And you can go into hydropower and then licensing, pull down a list of all the current hydropower licenses, and then find the project number for your project or whatever you're interested in close to home, and go from there back into e-library and start reading, which is, fun if you work for American Whitewater. We like that kind of thing. Hydropower Reform Coalition is also an excellent resource. I really encourage anyone interested in hydropower to peruse the website, look over the map of hydropower projects, and just learn what you can. It's a great community too. And that's it. Next slide.
I think that's it. But we definitely have some time for discussion. So
Please.
Yeah, I wanted to, this is Risa again, I wanted to call out Tom Waters if he's still here. He's from the Arkansas River Headwaters Association, because there's another type of controlled release or predictable release. So Tom, I don't know if you could describe for us the recreational in-channel diversion, what that is, because it's unique to Colorado. It's very cool, but very unique to Colorado.
Yeah, I will do my best. I don't know if I'll do as well as Kevin and David, but we have a voluntary flow management program, which is an agreement on the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area, and there's 5 signatories on it. And I think what's interesting about it is the 5 signatories, with the exception of Southeastern Water Conservancy District, are not water entities. However, that agreement does impact the way the water entities move their water. And it protects and provides for both the fishery and the recreational flow component. So this morning we just had a meeting. We're looking at what the snowpack is, what the imports are going to be from the Frying Pan Arkansas project. Part of that total goes towards the recreational flows, which is the 10,000 acre feet that we move for boating, specifically in that July 1st to August 15th timeframe. So it's pretty neat. It renews every 5 years, and that it kind of started coming together in the early 90s, and then it was actually formalized in an agreement. So every 5 years we renew it. Well, we have to date, and so recently we did that last year. So it's very successful, very proud of it, and happy to answer any questions the group would have on it.
Thank you very much, Tom. Didn't want to put you on the spot, but that was a great description. But I knew it was unusual. And also what's interesting about those is that they were started by the advent of whitewater parks, first in Golden, other places. So some town wants to build a whitewater park. They want to be able to guarantee that there will be water in the whitewater park. And they ask the state, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and they essentially get a junior water right that's non-consumptive. They're not moving the water someplace else and putting it back. So it was an unusual request for water, but it is junior. But anyway, you can't just like ask for one in Illinois or something like that, but it is a model that's really interesting, and it's been so successful, for so many towns.
It's a really neat partnership, and one of the things that's really grown from ours is that, like I said, that with the 5 signatories, we have other water entities like Pueblo Board of Waterworks who, don't sign that agreement, but definitely operate in a way that's beneficial to both the fishery and the recreational flow component. And so, even though they haven't signed it, we consider them partners as well.
Yeah, the over allocated West is like a whole different universe of like so much water moving around, but it has the same kind of community underpinnings and then also scientific underpinnings of how you put water back, which is, there's these recreational flow studies that are done typically that ascribe optimal flow ranges to different uses. And then that is usually leveraged to try to provide some benefits to communities. And I mean, one of the common themes is just figuring out something that's either mutually beneficial or at least just as good as it can be for as many people. If you're moving water, why not move it at a flow that works for paddling and works for the environment? Like if you're, have a certain volume, do you have to move it all at once in a big high flow versus spreading it out, something that's more useful? So we're always looking for that. Like where's the benefits here for other people? And really, I just try to solve other people's problems, and that helps a lot. It usually works out in the end.
Any questions, or are there any, I see Ed Fight there, so I don't know how water allocation or recreational flows run on the Illinois River, but if there's any other model, we'd love to hear, or certainly any questions. I think one thing that both Kevin and David understate is how much work's required for any of the above projects. I mean, you did mention 20 years on the Great Falls project. Many of the other ones are as long or long, not as long, and require lots of people. So they don't just happen. And David lived out of his truck and ate peanut butter for a number of years, fighting for the Ocoee and then subsequently for the Gauley. So they just don't happen. And I would say that most projects, if you're going to create significant change or institute a different type model, need a champion or several of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a ton of work. We talk about it a lot, how it's a huge investment, but then you get a huge outcome that's very long lasting and that has a lot of weight to it. You know, it matters when you do something that's going to be there for the rest of your life and fundamentally changes communities, you know, probably forever. But it's massive.
Ed, do you have any thoughts or comments on how your rivers are run or how releases are determined? Because they might be, I should know, but they might be federal dams. I'm not sure.
Our rivers, we share 4 of our scenic rivers with the state of Arkansas. There are no major dams, 4 of the 6. Most of them are spring fed. The Illinois, which is our workhorse in eastern Oklahoma for recreation, the majority of the wastewater that comes out of northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, Bentonville, where Walmart and others are headquartered, is channeled into the Illinois. And so we now have a new high low flow because of cubic feet per second coming out of these wastewater treatment plants that have continued to grow as the population swelling within the watershed. But really a case that finally put a couple of operations out of business was the operation of the 10 Killer Ferry Reservoir releases below. The Illinois is impounded below the Scenic River reach in Oklahoma, the designated portion. There's a 10 Killer Ferry Reservoir, which is about 35 miles in linear length, had releases that were pretty regular coming out of that facility. And so there were a couple of operators that located below the dam that were doing really good business. And then all of a sudden, as hydropower always goes, seems like you're spinning the turbines at night and putting your power back into the pool. And so most people don't float at night unless there's a full moon. And so anyway, on that particular river, when they start generating water, it's really interesting that you can hop on the river. You wait 30 minutes to hop on the river and you outrun the water. And you have to pull over to the side and wait for the river to come up 2 or 3 feet. But in Oklahoma, we're going through the climate changes as well. It seems like in the western 2/3 of the state, we're drying up. And in the eastern tier, it seems the storms have moved from the Oklahoma Panhandle, now fire up just south and east of Tulsa, and then march over into Arkansas and over into the Mississippi Valley, and then on up into where they lose their energy. But with that said, we have been in kind of a flash drought since the wintertime, and we're on task to get some rain this week. But typically when other rivers in this part of the United States are closing down middle part of the summer, we're still going. And so we have 365 floating generally, unless we have a high water event. And it used to be we would see CFS get down like you're seeing on the Guadalupe now down in Texas, where they're down in the 70, 80 range. We would dip in August sometimes to those rates, but now we're maintaining well above that. And so we're still running rafts, kayaks, and canoes and so forth. And for this part of the world, we're pretty fortunate. There's a lot of rambling from an old river coot, but it's good to see Kevin and David and others this afternoon. Been a long time.
Any questions, you guys? Anyone else who's listening or attending? Or one of our experts? So Kevin, if somebody wanted to get flow on their river and they think it's not predicted or it looks like it's been dry for a long time, what would be the first thing to do? And they think there's a hydropower dam.
Call me. unfortunately. No, yeah, I mean, chances are somebody local has a pretty good understanding of the situation. The FERC website's not a bad place to actually start. If you can find your dam and find it in the e-library, you can see who's CC'd on all the letters that have to go out to the whole service list, and you can look at the service list and just look down and see like who might be my friend, who might answer my questions with an open mind, that might share some of my values and interests, and then pick their brains because they've probably been at that table for a while. It's really like so complicated that like it's all about like finding a person that's been there, that like understands the dynamics, because it's just too much. It's too much to try to like comprehend with written words sometimes. Just the level of complexity.
You're dealing with recreational flows. The Scenic River program in Oklahoma is transitioned by an act of the legislature over to the Grand River Dam Authority, which captures water coming out of southeast Kansas and southwest Missouri, impounds the Pensacola project, or Grand Lake over the Cherokees. And we are going through a FERC relicensing now, and we're not certain what length of license we're going to have, but we're having to deal with the Indian tribes. There's, I want to say 12, 14 of them that are in northeast Oklahoma. And so there's some real issues there, but the project area is so large, and there's so many stakeholders that have been involved, that it's a very complicated and lengthy process for us. So I underscore what Kevin's been saying, and David, is that no two FERC licenses are the same.
Another question for Kevin, but others also. How would you categorize the 30-year licenses from 50-year licenses? It seems like there are a couple of attributes that automatically make it a longer one.
It's the last thing you learn in a FERC license. So no one knows how long the license is going to be until it's issued. And then FERC says, here's how long it is. And it's, it's 20 years. It's like a whole generation's difference, so it's a big deal. It's based on the level of investment. So if a power company just says, we just want to do what we've always done, we're not going to offer much, we're not doing much, then they're going to get a 30-year license. But if they go, way above and beyond, and they heavily invest in the environment, heavily invest in infrastructure that's good for dissolved oxygen and lots of rec flows and all that kind of stuff, then they might get a 50, and 40 is just somewhere in the middle. It's a kind of,
they say 40 is a default, but usually they're not 40.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. 40 is pretty common.
Is it?
Yeah, I've worked on a lot of 40s. It's the way that you make less people mad. You just pick the middle one. But it's funny, I'm not that old, but I've been doing this work since I was in my early 20s. So I'm already like halfway through some 40-year licenses that I worked on when I was, in my early 20s. It's kind of wild to like almost see some of them coming back around again.
Yeah, and time goes fast.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll, if there are no other questions, any other questions? I guess we can just go back to the couple of wrap up slides. And
yeah, just a reminder, we've been recording this. We're going to put it on our YouTube channel, and you can also catch a bunch of other roundtables if you haven't been able to make one in the past. We've got a whole bunch there on a playlist called the River Management Roundtables. Also encourage you to subscribe, because then you'll see new videos as we're posting them. And then also some upcoming events. So Risa, do you want to talk about the May one? You know a little bit.
Yeah, this is a kind of work in progress, but there'll be maybe 5 or 6 folks who are AAPIs or APIs who have various different jobs on rivers, and we'll just talk about what life is like for them at their work, and the extent to which being an Asian American Pacific Islander has an impact on what they do, how they fit in their organization, and has anything changed. here's some folks who are on the younger side, some folks who've been around for a long time. So I think they'll be interesting, and we're barely making it in AAPI month on the 31st. So we're legal for honoring the celebration of that group.
Thanks, Teresa. And then also, just as a reminder, coming up next Wednesday, we've got a 5th out of our 6 in our series on wild and scenic rivers. We're going to be looking at bank stabilization techniques for wild and scenic rivers. And then our last one out of our 6 sessions in our series is on visitor use management on wild and scenic rivers. That'll be in June on the 21st. So encourage you to go to our website and check that out. You can check our events calendar, and you can always find more information and register. I'll also put in a link here to the River Training Center. And then lastly, love to hear your thoughts about today's roundtable. I'm going to put a link to the survey in the chat as well. Also, if you have any ideas of things that you'd like to discuss or things that you're facing, please reach out and let us know. We're always just looking for topics that are applicable to you all and can be useful as we kind of put all of our minds together during these roundtables. So, and then lastly, got a little plug for
shameless plug. Dave, why did you just mention what this is? Well, if you're still muted, you're muted. We can't hear you. But this is all. Go ahead.
You can probably describe it better, Risa. You've read the book, so. But it's a story about the battles for the Ocoee and the Gauley River, which kind of encapsulates some of the issues that were discussed about the project purpose authorizations. And the early days of the growth of the heyday of the growth of the whitewater industry, when we were running around in river shorts and sandals, and nobody gave us a chance to win these battles against powerful federal agencies, but we did, and that's what the Whitewater Wars is about.
Yeah, it's I think it's not
available
long.
on Amazon.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like good old boys meet hippies. And in the 80s, it's absolutely fascinating. Many of the people who were involved besides David are still around. And I think it's a testament to entrepreneurial advocacy, at a time where there were no rules, and the power companies weren't smart enough to know that the kayakers were smart. And so all this kind of stuff, there's a lot that happened, but it took a lot of people like David and other people who had maybe an interest for their business at heart, but also for a love of paddling and whitewater rivers. And this is just a fascinating book, I think. So highly endorse it. And I don't get a penny if you buy one, but it's really cool. And I was hoping, I gave one to Aurora Pulliam, who signed up for this, who works at TVA. I thought she would find it really interesting. So I hope she's ready.
Well, that's all for today. Unless there's any other final questions or anything. But thanks again to David and Kevin, and thank you for all joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, David, for Rec Flows on the Ocoee. That's where I cut my teeth in Whitewater.
Thank you.